God's name is wrong with you? Have you lost your mind? You'll get us killed.
Well, we all gotta die sometime.
True as that may be, I'll not be crushed to death in a carriage accident or torn apart by a pack of wolves, understand? Not today!
The driver ignored Richard and climbed down from the carriage to soothe the horses.
Shh, it's all right now. I ain't gonna let anything happen to you.
The driver's soothing words worked like magic. The horses settled, and the carriage began to move again, much more smoothly. All of a sudden, out of the darkness came an awful rattling noise. It was as if the desert was a vast mouth grinding its teeth. Out of the corner of his eye, Richard saw a flash of blue light.
What's he looking for? And wait, where did that blue light come from? It looks like it's moving around. Whatever it is seems to be what's making that strange noise.
With no warning, the carriage slowed to a stop. The driver climbed down and, without saying a word, walked away into the darkness.
Hey, where the hell are you going? Are you insane? Oh God, why would he leave me alone like this? I've got nothing to defend myself with. They'll eat me alive. Go, get away from here. Shoot. You're getting closer. Driver, come back. Where the hell are you? Please help me. I don't want to die. Please, God, I don't want to die.
Richard wept and pleaded as he heard the wolves creep closer and closer. Suddenly, as quietly as the driver had vanished, he reappeared and climbed back onto the carriage and, without saying a word, began to drive as though nothing had happened.
Where the hell did you go? Why did you leave me to those wolves? I could have been killed. I'm asking you a question, damn it. Why don't you answer me?
Richard felt completely powerless. Out here in the desert, he was entirely at the driver's mercy. As they proceeded, the little blue lights continued to flash around them. Every time the driver saw one, Richard noticed, he would stop the carriage and climb down. Then he would place little stones around the light, encircling it, and return to his seat without saying a word. Another blue light twinkled from the darkness, and the driver again brought the carriage to a halt. He climbed down to perform his odd little ritual, and as he approached the blue light, Richard noticed something that shocked him to the core. The light was closer to the carriage than any of the other ones had been, and as the driver approached it, the light surrounded him, and then went right through him. It was as though the driver wasn't even there.
Am I hallucinating? What have I gotten myself into? I don't understand any of this. Driver, at least tell me how much longer it'll take before we reach Via de Sombra. Or maybe we'll never get there. Maybe this is some awful trick you're playing, and I'll spend the rest of my life being driven in circles around this godforsaken desert.
The driver ignored the broken window. Exhausted, Richard sank back into his seat. Every now and then he could still hear the wolves howling. It seemed fainter and further away. They drove on through the desert when suddenly the full moon appeared from behind the clouds. The wolves began to growl again, louder than before, and the carriage screeched to a halt. Richard nervously peered out the window and jolted back in terror. There were hundreds of wolves surrounding the carriage, all of them facing the moon. As Richard watched, each of them began to howl, loud enough to shake the ground. Richard trembled. Beads of sweat dropped from his forehead. If the wolves turned on the carriage, he would be done for. But as the howling continued, Richard noticed that the driver seemed completely relaxed. Then, to Richard's shock, the driver climbed down from the carriage and approached the wolves. He was mumbling something under his breath and making strange gestures with his hands, like a ringmaster. The wolves stopped howling and suddenly slunk off into the night. The horses settled down, and once again, they began to move.
What was that? How did he get those wolves to go away?
The path started to feel more even, and the carriage rode smoothly. Richard began to feel drowsy again and closed his eyes, slipping into a dreamless slumber. After a while, the carriage came to a stop, and the change in motion jolted Richard awake. He blinked the sleep from his eyes, and through the window, he saw a great ancient mansion rising before him. Its many windows and doors were black and empty, as though the walls were simply a stone shell encasing a vast, impenetrable mass of nothingness.
By the grace of God, we made it. This place is enormous. I've never seen anything like it.
Pretty spectacular, ain't it? Here, let me help you down.
The driver held Richard's wrist to help him down from the carriage. Richard winced. His grip was tight enough that he felt the bones in his wrist grind together.
It feels like we've been driving all night. God, I'm freezing. I'd kill for a hot cup of tea, but I don't see anyone. Where are all the servants? Driver, go and tell your master we've arrived. Hey, wait! Where are you going? Wait! Oh, damn it all, now what do I do? I can knock, but this place is so big I doubt anyone will hear me. And it looks so dark and old and run down. I bet there's nobody here at all. God, what am I to do? I'll freeze to death out here.
Miserable, Richard pulled his coat tighter around him. He had no idea what to do next. Just as he had lost all hope, he heard a faint sound of footsteps coming from inside the walls of the mansion.
Oh, thank God someone's coming.
Richard shivered before the door, thinking of nothing but of a hot bath and a comfortable bed. Then the door opened, and Richard saw who stood behind it. It was Danny DaCosta himself. His appearance was odd. He was unusually tall, taller than anyone Richard had ever seen, with a patchy beard and heavy, broad shoulders. His eyes, like the carriage driver's, were a dark red color, sunk deep into their sockets. He wore a thick black overcoat, but he didn't seem to feel the chill in the air. He fixed his strange, ruddy gaze on Richard and, with a smirk, extended his hand.
My friend, welcome to Valle de Sombra. You had a good trip?
Yes. Very pleasant. I hope I didn't wake you.
Oh, don't worry. I don't sleep much.
They shook hands. Richard noticed that Danny's fingers were as cold and his grip as strong as the carriage driver's.
You must be Mr. DaCosta. It's a pleasure. A real pleasure to meet you.
Likewise. Come on inside. You must be frozen. Here, I'll get your bags.
No, I couldn't possibly.
Nonsense. I like my guests to be comfortable. Wouldn't want you leaving before we conduct our business, after all.
But shouldn't your butler...
My staff are sound asleep.
Richard followed Danny down a long, dark corridor. They climbed a winding flight of stairs, up, and walked down another shadowy hallway once they reached the top. Danny stopped outside a thick, elaborately carved wooden door and pushed it open.
Your room, friend. Comfortable?
Yes, very comfortable.
The fireplace ought to keep it nice and cozy. Let me take your coat.
Oh no, that's all right.
You hush now, friend. My home is your home, remember?
Danny draped his coat over a chair and, nodding courteously, left the room. Richard finally began to feel at peace. The fireplace kept the room toasty and warm, and the windows were covered by heavy velvet drapes, blocking out the chill air completely. The furniture was elaborately crafted, and elegance and wealth oozed from every corner and wall. It was quite different from the stately old ruin the mansion appeared to be from the outside. As Richard explored the room, Danny returned.
This way, friend. I took the liberty of running a bath for you. Let me show you to the tub.
As Richard followed Danny to the bathroom, he suddenly remembered the old innkeeper from Marfa. Her words rang in his ears.
It's not today you gotta fear. It's tonight. Tonight's a full moon. Don't you know what happens on a full moon? Evil spirits come out when the clock strikes midnight. And heaven help anyone they get their claws into.
So what, Richard thought to himself. He had made it to Valle de Sombro, through that awful desert, even with the full moon. He was perfectly safe. Danny DaCosta was such a kind and generous host. He would surely never let anything happen to him.